Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp November. She's the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is November 13th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send your questions and comments to Helga via email. Send them to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them in the chat page. I want to announce at the beginning that the Schiller Institute is sponsoring a crucial conference on December 7th and 8th under the title, In the Spirit of Schiller and Beethoven, All Men Become Brethren. You'll find a link to register for this at the schillerinstitute.com website. I'm sure we'll be discussing this today as we take up the question of what can be done to be sure that we can move humanity out of the danger it's in, with two wars going on and planning for more wars, which we'll be discussing in the course of this dialogue. So Helga, it's been a week since the election of Donald Trump as US president. I'm reasonably certain that the establishment is still somewhat shocked and launching plans to maintain their control, but there have been many reverberations resulting from the vote. I've received several emails expressing pessimism about the incoming administration. So let's start with this. What is your recommendation to the president-elect? What should his immediate priorities be?
Well, obviously the selection of his cabinet and otherwise leaders of the institutions does give room for a certain concern, because obviously the world stage has changed dramatically since Trump left the White House 4 years ago. And now the existence of a global majority in the form of the BRICS is a new strategic reality, which I think no president of the United States, nor head of any other government of any country can sort of ignore. There was just recently the meeting in Kazan where 22 countries are now members of the BRICS, or about ready to be members by the beginning of the year. And then about 30 more countries have expressed interest to join that group. Now, already in Kazan, this was 4.7 billion people represented, meaning 57% of the world population. And if you look at the countries involved, it's China and India, and between these two population-rich countries, it's already almost 3 billion people. Then you have many emerging countries like Brazil, Indonesia, but also many others. And the growth rates were especially in that part of the world. So, for the United States to somehow not try to have a positive relationship to that group of countries who have stated explicitly that they're not a bloc, they're not trying to compete with NATO, they're not trying to, exclude countries. I think the offer of Xi Jinping to Obama of some years ago that the United States should sort of align with China, that offer still exists. The BRICS are open to even NATO members. So I think, given the fact that it's a new presidency, and I'm sure that Trump has drawn his own conclusion of what happened in his first time in office, the Russia Gate, who was behind it. He has made several announcements that he would open the Kennedy files, and he could also open many other files for that matter. So I think he could start with a completely clean plate, and he could try to really make good on his promise, to end the wars, to for sure not begin new ones. And even beyond that, I think that the crucial question is if we can convince the countries of the so-called collective West, that's the United States and West European nations, to cooperate with the BRICS countries in the development of the global South. I think this is the challenge of our time, because the beautiful thing is that the countries of Africa, Asia, Latin America are in a full swing to overcome not only colonialism but neocolonialism, which persisted after they reached in so-called independence. And now all of these countries do no longer want to be just raw material exporters, but they want to keep the raw materials for reprocessing, to develop the value chain in their own country, to become full set economies and increase the living standards so that poverty and underdevelopment are eradicated. And that is naturally the only way how you can prevent millions of people trying to flee because of poverty and hardship. And that way, can you solve the migrant question? So for Trump being now in office, rather than trying to build a wall, which I'm terribly afraid he will do, but even if he starts building this wall, which I think is really the mistaken policy altogether, if he would reach out and basically say, we help, he is going now. Biden is going now to Lima, to Peru, where there is the APEC meeting. There will be Xi Jinping, and Biden will go there with 600 military, which is a sort of show of force, I would think. But they want to build the bi-oceanic railway, which would connect the oceans and be a tremendous infrastructure development for all of Latin America, because it would have all kinds of side effects. If the United States would say, we are not trying to fight that, but we are cooperating. Likewise, we cooperate in the development of Africa and other Asian countries. I think that way, Europe could do likewise, and rather than having this horror show of, thousands and thousands of people crossing the Sahara to then drown in the Mediterranean or being pushed back by Frontex, which is the Coast Guard sort of the European Union, and which has turned the Mediterranean already into a wet graveyard. Take a different approach. Join hands with the BRICS and say, we will build together infrastructure, ports, railways, fast speed trains, desalinization of ocean water, reconquer the deserts, the Sahel zone, the Sahara, which both are expanding at this time significantly every year. And that way you can build industrial parks, you can build, beautiful landscapes by having reforestation where there is now desert, or to have, agriculture where there's now wasteland, essentially, like in Sudan, and many other such projects. The Transaqua project, which would give, water and electricity to 12 UNRWA countries. All of these projects are so big that it would really be necessary for all countries who have the industrial capacities to join hands and to develop them. And if Trump would do that, I think it would be, I have said this already at his first term, he could become one of the great presidents of the United States. If he goes in the other way, in the realm of confrontation and, having America great again at the expense of the rise of China or other countries, I see the world will unfortunately go in a terrible direction. But it's fresh, it's a new tabula rasa, so to speak, not entirely naturally, but he could really set the tone in a promising way. So let's hope that can be understood by as many people as possible. That's why we are conducting the conference of the Schiller Institute on the 7th and 8th of December. And I can already promise we will have a fantastic group of speakers. And I think this is a conference everybody should really be tuned into.
Now, in the context of your answer just then, we have a report that Colonel Douglas McGregor, who served at the end of the first term of Donald Trump in the Defense Department, spoke of the failure of sanctions, bullying, and threatening other nations, obviously criticizing the policies of Madeleine Albright and Blinken and Biden. And he said, we must pull out a clean sheet of paper and start from scratch. Now, again, there's skepticism from people that Trump would do this, but then there's the other side. A question came in, if the US were to do this, do you think that this would be accepted by the nations which have been the victims and targets of sanctions, bullying, and threats?
On the latter part of the question, I would emphatically say yes, because I think that the spirit which was there in Kazan, but also at the recent other conferences, there was the Russia African Forum right now, I think may still be going on. There was the Valdai discussion. And in all of these conferences, the spirit was always, people quoted it, the spirit of Bandung, the spirit of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And that spirit is not revanchist. It's not revengist. It's basically ready to respect the sovereignty of all, but also have no interference into the internal affairs of the other, to accept the different social system of the other, and generally work for each other's common good. I think that is the opposite of revanche, and therefore I'm quite optimistic that if the United States and Europe, for that matter, would make such a strong signal, the joy of that the old regime of wars and interventions and sanctions and weaponization of currency and killing your leaders would stop. I mean, Tucker Carlson, I think, just said something very interesting. He said, that if people would be aware of how much the world was hanging on the abyss of nuclear extinction of mankind, they would be absolutely horrified. And he also called for a change in the policy. And he said, look, we, meaning the United States, went into these other countries and killed their leaders, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, and we tried with Assad from Syria. And naturally, one could make a longer list if one goes back in history a lot. So I think if that would stop, and I think there is a justified hope that Trump will stop this, because I don't think that that's his intention. So if that would become official American policy, the whole world would be so joyful that and that bridge to a new paradigm is actually there. So I think all people of goodwill should really try to join forces right now. And if you have a gremium, if you have a club, an association of which you are part of, just bring these perspectives in. And I think it depends. We are in a revolutionary period insofar that if you listen to what a lot of so-called social media, alternative YouTube channels, Rumble channels, all kinds of channels, what people are saying there is really a new quality of recognition what the problem was, and an expressed disagreement that this should continue. I mean, it's still the case that the NATO-led governments are in control in most of Europe, but underneath there is a revolt going on where I think the Trump voters clearly do not want to continue this policy. So if Trump would make a step in this direction, I think a real world revolution could happen. Will he do it? Well, I pray.
You're listening to Helga Zepp the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, and someone who's been fighting for this change for many, many years. Now, the other question that's come from several regulars is for your assessment of the response from Russia and the BRICS. And there are several references to the speech given by Vladimir Putin at the Valdai Club, in which he presented the idea of polyphony as the more complex concept to describe what some people call multipolarity. And the question is from several people, what do you think Putin means by this?
Well, I think Putin is an extremely educated person who knows the principles of classical composition. And that is what it refers to, meaning that, and he says it actually in the speech explicitly, rather than having an unipolar world where you have a soloist who is singing all the time and he suppresses all the other members of a potential chorus because he wants only to have his voice listened to. I mean, I'm now elaborating it a little bit. He says we should have like a symphony, a polyphonic composition where all the voices are being heard and all the different musical themes are working together in a polyphonic composition, which is a one. And I think that's a very beautiful image of how nations could relate to each other. Because, like in a composition, you have a small theme, then you have a larger ongoing theme, and these different themes are being interwoven, sometimes in a double fugal composition, sometimes in some other ways. But from these different musical ideas and subjects, all notes have a place. And in a thorough composition, there is not one note too much, but each note plays a crucial role. And that is a beautiful metaphor for the difference of nations. Obviously you have big nations, you have small nations, you have something like Liechtenstein, and you have Russia. One is very tiny, the other one is 11 time zones. You have countries who have a lot of people, like China and India. Then you have small countries who have just a few million or even less. You have countries who have lots of raw materials, and you have other countries who have almost none. You have different degrees of development. But all of these countries, if they participate in a joint common good of development, each of them can unfold all the potential which is embedded in them. So it's like a symphony where, when you have a classical polyphonic composition, it is harmonic, it sounds beautiful to the ear, it elevates the soul, and, it corresponds to the highest image of man in the image of the creator, or man as a creative being. And that is a very beautiful image of how we get out of this crisis, because I believe since at least 40 years now, actually much longer, but 40 years ago when I founded the Schiller Institute, I named the Schiller Institute because Friedrich Schiller was the German poet who had the idea that each human being has a potential to become a genius. And through the aesthetic education, you can not only develop your mind and unleash all your intellectual potentialities, but you can also educate your emotions, that you can start to feel more noble. Can you imagine that you're not a greedy beast who, running after the trough to get the biggest loot, but that you can actually take all your emotions, all of them, and educate them so that they feel more on the level of reason through aesthetic education. And I believe in that sense that man is perfectible and man is good by nature. And if you proceed to build this new system of nations along these lines, I think we are on the verge of a new renaissance, which will be more beautiful than all renaissances which we had in the past.
It seems as though Putin is a co-thinker of yours on this whole question of the fundamental principles that you drafted. And people should go to the schillerinstitute.com website and read your fundamental principles, where essentially this discussion at the Valdai Club reminded me of the discussion that you've initiated around this. Now, you mentioned earlier that there is still scrambling, let's say, of the EU and NATO countries to try to respond to the fear that if Trump does pull away from a war in Ukraine, what's going to happen? Who's going to take up the slack? Now, there was a conference that took place recently in Budapest, I think it was, sponsored by Orban. Von der Leyen and others sent obligatory congratulations to Trump, but there's still a mobilization to continue the war. And meetings have been set up by the Polish government and the British to prepare for that. What can you tell us about the overall reaction in Europe? And do they really think that they could carry on a war against Russia?
Well, I must say that there is right now, quite independent of whatever Trump will do or not do, a real concerted effort by this NATO Atlanticist crowd, starting with a new article. I think it's in Foreign Magazine of the Council of Foreign Relations or the Atlantic Council, I forgot now. And an equivalent article in the DGAP, which is the German think tank in Berlin, who just put out likewise a report. And the argument goes sort of like this, that the coming war with China between the United States and China is inevitable. Therefore, the United States will reorientate towards the Pacific, and therefore Europe should compensate for US soldiers to leave Europe. Europe should also militarize to build up more military capacity, to have more production, even of ammunition to be used in the future in the war with China. This is just completely insane. And there are certain politicians who are voicing that. The last one is Pistorius, the German defense minister, who, can you imagine that he was asked, what about if Trump wants to end the Ukraine war? And Pistorius said, yeah, I fear that danger exists. Can you imagine that? He fears that peace could break out. I mean, that shows you how upside down these people are thinking. And naturally, one should be careful that this is not an easy job, because I think Trump will be inclined to put the burden of the cost for Ukraine on the Europeans. This will cause bad blood for sure. So I'm not saying we are in paradise right away. I was just talking about the potential, which people should see where we could go. But I think that there is right now a renewed push. The Polish chief of staff just said that Poland wants to take the lead in, being, given the fact that the government of Germany is basically fell, and will be a confidence vote on the 16th of December, and then a new vote probably on the February 23rd. So there's high instability in Germany. France is also in a very unstable position. And therefore, there is an effort to create a new axis between the Biden administration, as long as it is still there, the British government, the Polish, the Baltic countries, the new foreign minister sort of the EU Commission, this woman Callas. She is a hawk, which is unbelievable. She's just a tiny country of a few million people, but she wants to take on Russia, no problem. It's a nuclear power, but little country, Lithuania, I think she's from Lithuania, she wants to take on an atomic superpower, the largest in the world. I don't know what these people eat for breakfast, it must be some strange cereal which has steroids in it or some other device. Anyway, joking aside, I think this is very stupid and very dangerous. And this idea of the coming war with China, that's just the worst kind of thing to be said, because nobody would survive such a war. And if you look at the military alliance between Russia and China, which was again consolidated with a visit of former Defense Minister Shoigu in China. He met with Wang Yi, the foreign minister, and they basically said that the relationship between Russia and China is the best ever, and it will be expanded and improved in all fields. Then there is the new military alliance between Russia and North Korea, and also the military alliance between Russia and Iran. So if you take on any one of these countries, you take them on all. And then you have World War III, and that's it. So I think people should really start rethinking this idea of the coming war with China, because it's a terrible monster idea.
Kallas is actually from Estonia, which is even smaller than Lithuania. Now, among the other developments, and you just mentioned this, was the collapse of the German government. And the new elections have been set for February 23rd. They were scheduled for next September. Then there was a talk about doing them in March, but there's a push to get them as quickly as possible to get a change of government. And lurking in the background is Friedrich Merz from the CDU. The question came in, give us your sense of what's in motion politically in Germany. And is there anyone stepping forward with solutions to the problems with the German economy? And will people tolerate Merz, who's more of a hawk than the Greens?
Well, I think the situation is not an easy one, because the government fell over the question of Ukraine, where Scholz demanded more billions for weapons to Ukraine, and he demanded from the finance minister Lindner that he should loosen the debt brake, which has been voted into the Grundgesetz, into the German constitution. So Scholz was willing to lift this unholy debt brake, which doesn't make sense at all, to finance the war in Ukraine, but he refused in the past to do likewise for investments in the infrastructure and industrial investments in Germany, which would be so urgent, given the fact that the German economy is in a free fall as a result of the sabotage of Nord Stream, the pipeline, the lacking of cheap energy from Russia. And Germany is just in a terrible situation. I think we will go into a horrible fall and winter, because the impact of many firms either going bankrupt or going abroad to go into countries where better investment climate exists, that impact will be felt even more and more in the next months, in the winter and beyond. So Scholz was not willing to do anything about that, which is already, shows you that he's really a terrible chancellor. But what Lindner proposed was he was refusing the loosening of the debt brake, but he said, we should send the Taurus instead. Now, that would be the red line of red lines, because as was discovered in this leak with the conversation of these 3 German Bundeswehr officers, that the Taurus cannot be operated by the Ukrainians alone. It does require the Bundeswehr technicians and all kinds of intelligence data and so forth. So it would mean the Taurus would be operated by German soldiers. That would mean Germany would be in the war with Russia. Are these people still in their right mind? Russia is the largest, most powerful nuclear power in the world, and the German army is a joke. All you could do is have a trigger to World War III, and Germany would be destroyed for sure. So that much for Lindner. And, now you have a situation where Merz, the opposition leader, is pushing to have early elections. He put a lot of pressure to speed it up even, to which Scholz now agreed. So there is a compromise for the 23rd of February. But this same Merz, he wants to give the Ukrainians the Taurus 2 and combine it with an ultimatum to Russia saying either you stop bombing Ukraine infrastructure within 24 hours, or we will allow the Ukrainians to use these Taurus missiles deep into the territory of Russia. This means World War III. So that is why the election, is not solving any problem. I mean, a lot of people agree that this government of the so-called streetlight coalition was the worst one we had since World War II. But unfortunately, if it's just a replacement with Merz, who is a war hawk, combined with the Greens or the FDP, both of them are hawks, you are not getting into an improvement. So now the latest rumors are that it may end up with a great grand coalition again, CDU, CSU plus SPD, in which naturally Scholz would not be the chancellor, but probably Merz. But that doesn't really solve the problem much either, because Merz is one of these hardcore Atlanticists, and the SPD has been very weak. Even so, one must say Scholz at least prevented the Taurus so far. That's not much, but something important. So, there is also the opposition. That's the AfD, Alternative for Germany, the Wagenknecht Group, and naturally the BÜSO, of which I'm the leading candidate. At least that's the plan. But now the problem has arisen that the shortage of the election campaign. I mean, you're supposed to collect thousands of signatures for a state slate. And then on top of it, the time until when you have to deliver the collected signatures is 6 weeks before election date. So that would basically mean that you have to give all the signatures collected at the beginning of January, which leaves you 5 weeks of collecting for the signatures. But this is the Christmas period. You have Christmas where it's very difficult to collect signatures because people are running around for presents. Then you have the period between Christmas and New Year where many people go for vacation. So there is now a protest from 8 so-called smaller parties who have sent a fire alarm letter to the government, I think, or to the election of officials, that this cannot be met. Now, obviously, it cannot be met, but, if they exclude, there are right now 120 small parties in Germany. If they exclude all of them, what about democracy? This is sort of a blanco check for the established parties in the parliament, and they make the rules such that opposition parties cannot participate. So this will be an issue for sure, and we will try to maneuver in that as best as we can. But it's not an easy situation. But since we are in the same position like almost 110 other parties, maybe we find some allies to go to the Constitutional Court. But that's the situation where we are.
Okay, we're listening to Helga Zepp the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. We'll be having again the International Peace Coalition Zoom call this Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And I want to remind people, look on the schillerinstitute.com website and sign up now, not just for yourself, but circulate to your friends to come to the December 8th, 7th, and 8th Schiller Institute Zoom conference. Now, Helga, we have a couple more questions that came in. Our friend Diana from Canada says, Helga, you're correct. We need a global revolution or renaissance, not a globalist reset. And a friend from Africa on that point said that there's clearly a rebellion against identity politics and geopolitics. But he asks, how do you move the thinking from a rebellion to a positive conception of man that would enable a renaissance to take place, in which the idea is that all humans are potentially creative? How do you make that? How do you inspire people to go to that higher level?
Well, I mean, we have been talking about that for 40 years or more, namely that you need a new world economic order, but that will only function if you combine it with a renaissance of classical music or classical culture, not just of the European tradition, but of all traditions. Because if you look, you have in every civilization, in every nation, you have high points and low points in which art was expressed accordingly. I mean, for example, the classical period in Germany, which produced the music from Bach through, Mozart, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann, Brahms. I mean, this is a period in which, if you listen to the compositions, it is so absolutely uplifting. Likewise, you have Verdi in Italy and other composers elsewhere. You have a certain amount of classical compositions, a lot of classical compositions in China, in India, in other countries. And, for the representatives of the different culture, it is very difficult to understand it. If you grow up with it, it's beautiful, it's pleasant in your ear. But if you are new, you have to discover it. And that's why we have been emphasizing the dialogue of civilizations, because, I'm absolutely certain that this title of the conference, in the spirit of Schiller and Beethoven, all men will become brethren, brethren standing for men, which is, man and woman, obviously. That can only happen, when people become beautiful souls and genius, at least the inclination in that direction. That means you have to have a self-conception of your own development. You have to have, you have to sit down any day or once a year or whatever and think, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to be a mediocre consumer, who just stuffs his face with some objects and food, and then on your grave there is a sign which says, this person at 1,000 breads with caviar, and he consumed 9,000 or 90,000 porter steaks and whatever. I'm using it as a metaphor for other forms of consumerism. Or do you want to bring out the best in what you as a gifted person could make in terms of your life and contribution, in terms of composition of music, writing poetry, painting beautiful paintings, drawings, writing beautiful essays, educating your citizens, your children, become a teacher, become a scientist, a discoverer. There's so many areas where you can develop what is in you. Most people don't do it. And I think what we are seeing right now is indeed an upheaval around the world. And I think the good thing about human beings is that once they see a hope and once they see an option, they are motivated to, go in this direction and fulfill it. It's only when cultural pessimism rules and they think there's nothing one can do anyway, then people become small and even nasty and potentially even fascist. This is an important subject, that there is a correlation between cultural pessimism and accepting fascism. So I think that therefore, since there are so many forces in motion, the global South countries do express that spirit. At least I have heard a lot of people from the global South in the recent months in particular. So that I think that if we push forward this idea, and that's the purpose of the Schiller Conference, beginning of December, that we want to, and I know we are being listened to more and more, and this is very important because I think we are still a factory of ideas which can inspire a lot of other movements and people, so that everybody brings in the best they have as a potential.
Well, Helga, thank you for your continuing optimism and your fight for truth and beauty. I wonder if you can give us a little sense of what you expect will come from the International Peace Coalition Zoom call on Friday.
Well, I know we have several speakers from Israel who are, horrified what Israel is doing right now and who are fighting for the rights of the Palestinians. So that is an important issue because, the genocide is continuing and the UN is permanently warning that the hunger crisis in Gaza is worsening by the day. even the German radio this morning, which has been quiet for months and months, they had a report this morning saying that the amount of food which the children in Gaza are getting is becoming less and less and less by the day, and that they are slowly dying, and that is obviously the intention. So that going on, with innocent children who cannot be accused of anything, that, I think that is the big moral, um, warning sign that we are losing our moral fitness to survive. So we will have several speakers about that topic, and actually we will for sure comment on the strategic implication of the outcome of the US election and what the German crisis forebodes. So please come and join us, because the International Peace Coalition is sort of an integral part of our effort to unify all people of goodwill in the world to, fight for a solution before it is too late. So join us on Friday.
Well, Helga, thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you on Friday.
Yes, till Friday.